This is a surprise bonus episode of Inside Psycho. I'm Mark Ramsey. I wanted to update you a little bit. First of all, I want to thank you, all of you who've listened to this series. We've just been overwhelmed with your positive comments and your enthusiasm and your appreciation for what we're doing. And we couldn't be more thankful to you for listening. Second, yes, we will be back. There is another season coming. I am happy to report that the writing finally, after about 6 months, is just about done. I hope to finish it as of this recording today or tomorrow. I'm very happy with it. I think you'll like it too. No, it will not be Psycho. No, I will not tell you what movie it is yet. But you can look for that in your feed, this feed, coming this fall. Most likely, guess what month? October. Third, I wanted to do something special for this bonus episode. So I recorded an interview with Rob Galluzzo. He's the senior editor at Blumhouse.com and the director of a documentary called The Psycho Legacy. I'm Mark Ramsey. I'm really pleased today to have Rob Galluzzo with me. This is the first time we've actually done a special Q&A interview in the feed for Inside Psycho, and Rob, I'm so glad that you can be.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be the first.
Rob is the senior editor at Blumhouse.com. He is one of the hosts of a great podcast that you should be listening to called Shockwaves. And also, and this is what's relevant for this conversation, Rob is the creator and director of a documentary called The Psycho Legacy. Rob, let me back up before we get into Psycho Legacy. I just want people to understand, for anybody who doesn't know, what Blumhouse is, what you do there, and then we can talk about the podcast and then get into the documentary.
Oh, sure. Well, Blumhouse is Blumhouse Productions, which is Jason Blum's production company, and they're most well known for producing Paranormal Activity, Insidious, The Purge, and more recently Get Out and Split were our big movies this year. And basically, Jason really wanted to have a website destination that celebrated all things scary. And so he brought in my colleague, Rebecca McKendry, who spent a decade at Fangoria, to be the editor-in-chief of Blumhouse.com. Becca brought me on kind of as her second-hand senior editor. And we got a really great team together that basically, the website is a slightly different entity from the production house in that we don't exclusively talk about Blumhouse movies. In fact, we talk about everything except Blumhouse movies. It's really a traditional horror website that talks about the history of horror movies, but at the same time, we delve into modern creepypastas and urban legends. We talk about true crime. Basically, if you have an interest in the macabre or the dark or the weird, we will write about it. And so that's what the website's like, and that's what we get to write about every day.
But you do have first dollar gross on everything Blumhouse puts out, right?
God, I wish.
All right, so that's and the podcast Shockwaves is kind of the centerpiece of the Blumhouse.com effort. The reason we got connected was over your documentary, which is really terrific, called The Psycho Legacy. So walk me through how you first came to the decision. I mean, creating a documentary is kind of like creating this podcast. It takes a whole lot of work up front. Can you talk about what went into that decision that you made to do that?
Oh, a lot of naivety.
Yeah, welcome to the club.
Yeah. No, I mean, the honest truth is, I've told the story, so I'll try to do it as condense it as much as possible. Basically, this was around 2007 or so, and I had already been running a horror website called Icons of Fright, which I had co-created with my friend Mike Cucinato back in 2004. And the basic gist of that site, because it was kind of the Wild West in the early 2000s on the internet, especially in terms of horror sites. So we were into extensive interviews, almost like a monthly magazine where you read really lengthy interviews of people in the genre. And through that experience, I just met a lot of people in the business, and I was always a Psycho fan. I think to this day, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I grew up on the sequels. They were the movies that were on HBO regularly. they're the ones that I saw a lot. And it was my favorite film franchise. And at that point, very little was known about the sequels. Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, all these franchises got box sets with special features, and Psycho was the one that I always felt fell by the wayside. So very naively, I'm like, I really want to do interviews with people that continued the franchise, because I think that's a story worth telling. And basically, it started out almost as something to do for the website Icons of Fright, and my rationale as well, I might as well shoot these, for prosperity's sake, as videos. And before you know it, I was basically making a documentary, and the word got out there. They're like, oh, this guy's doing a documentary on the Psycho movies. And that's when I was like, God, now I have to finish it, because people are talking about it. So, but I always had a fascinating interest in film and documentaries in particular. So once I started, it just felt natural, and because writing articles is not too far fetched from doing podcasts or making documentaries. Mm-hmm. You're looking for the best sound bites and snippets, and putting them in order to tell a story properly. So the whole thing came together almost by accident, but once I started it, I was pretty obsessed with finishing it. And just by coincidence, we finished it in 2010, which was the 50th anniversary of the original Psycho's release. Now we're at 57, which is crazy.
Yeah, what's funny is the folks at Wondery who put out this podcast are always saying, look for the anniversary, look for the anniversary. And here I found myself at anything but an anniversary. And one of the questions people would ask me is, well, why are you doing a movie that's 50 years old? And my answer was always, well, because it's Psycho.
Yeah.
That should be reason enough.
Yeah.
Talk to me about why, for you, Psycho is such a benchmark movie.
There's only a handful of films out there that have become such a part of pop culture that you will recognize things from them whether you've seen the movie or not. And like Psycho is one of those in terms of in the language of film, where the screeching violins, the shower scene, well, if you're not lucky, the twist at the end. It's something that really changed how we interpret and watch and appreciate and enjoy film. And, I've read a lot of stuff about, there's so much material about the making of Psycho. The book by Stephen Rebello, Alfred Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho, is probably the essential thing that you would need to read. And there's just so much that's fascinating about it. I mean, people forget that before 1960, you would go and pay one price and see a newsreel and some cartoons and part of a movie and then another movie, and just kind of come and go as you please. And Psycho was the first movie that really dictated, no, you have to come at this specific time to see the film, or you're not seeing it at all. You have to see it from start to finish. And a big part of that was because of the twist that Janet Leigh, although is billed as the top star, is only in the first third of the film. And, Hitchcock was nervous that people would come in the middle of the movie and be like, where's Janet Leigh? I don't understand. So, inadvertently, that's how we watch movies now. There are set times. You have to go at a specific time and watch it from start to finish. So, that's one of many little things that have dictated the way that we watch movies now.
It's funny that it kind of does make sense, though, you got to admit, to come in at the beginning, leave at the end.
Oh, of course. I mean, I don't know. I guess they were just looking at it as just entertainment at that period, right, where it was like, you'll get whatever content we give you for however many hours you have in the afternoon.
Well, it was television of its time, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I found it interesting, too, that I know you've told this story, and I want you to retell it, about how different generations bring their own perspective to the brand. You have a story that you wrote up recently that I read, and it was just a wonderful story about how you went into a bank wearing a shirt.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is great because it's just so funny. Like, obviously, this documentary is now 7 years behind me, and I just cannot escape Psycho. Anyway, you slice it. I just finished the special features for the UK release of Psycho 2, which is coming out, I think, in July or August. And then I was asked to moderate a panel for Bates Motel, which was the A&E series that just wrapped. And I thought they did a terrific job of reinterpreting the original Psycho. And what I love about it is it now opens up a whole generation of fans to hopefully go back to the original Psycho. And the example you mentioned was pretty early in the show's run. I figure probably the first or second season, I went into a bank wearing a T-shirt of the silhouetted mother from the shower scene. And the girl at the counter was very excited and asked me about it. And I'm like, oh, it's Norman Bates from Psycho. And she's like, oh, like Bates Motel, the TV show? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, but I don't understand. That's Mother. That's not Norman. And I was like, well, you know that Norman kills his mother and takes her place. And she's like, what?
Oh, no.
Just like, oh, my God, I'm sorry that I just spoiled a 50-year-old movie for you. But that's, but I also think that's part of what people are looking for, back in the Star Wars prequel days. We know that Anakin's going to be Darth Vader. It's part of interesting storytelling as of the last decade is knowing where it ends.
Right.
Batman Begins, Darth Vader, now Bates Motel. Part of the fun is seeing how it gets to that point.
Right. I have my own story along those lines. When one of the reasons why I chose Psycho as the first chapter in this series is because I'm part of the Broadcast Film Critics Association, and our award show, the Critics' Choice Awards, airs on A&E. A&E, of course, is the broadcast partner for Bates Motel.
Yeah.
And so we had an opportunity to try and get some of our content on A&E's digital platform. And I thought, well, I have an idea. I'm interested in this topic, picking a movie, going deep into the movie. Bates Motel is on A&E. Why don't I pick Psycho? That'll make it more attractive to the folks at A&E and so on. Well, A&E looked at a bunch of the material from my organization. They didn't like too much of it. And they specifically said no audio because, their digital platform, like all digital platforms, are primarily interested in social media spreading and so on. And audio, as you know, Rob, is not the sticky. It's kind of sticky, but it doesn't spread well, right? It doesn't share well.
Right.
It's not very social. So they said anything but audio. And of course, here I'm creating audio. So I did the teaser. The teaser was actually done before the rest of the show. And the teaser was submitted to A&E. And they said, we're not really interested in any of this stuff, except for the Bates thing. And I thought it was so funny that their response to the teaser for Inside Psycho was the Bates thing.
Yeah. But you know what? I'm all for it, honestly. And that's honestly why I made the Psycho Legacy when I did, is it felt like we were at a period of time where people were forgetting Psycho, the original Psycho. They were forgetting about Hitchcock and Anthony Perkins. The last memory they had was the 98 remake by Gus Van Sant, which was, it's an interesting experiment, but it's a pretty colossal failure in terms of, reinvigorating that particular franchise. And I was just nervous that it was going to fall by the wayside. So I wanted to remind people that this character exists, these movies exist, the books exist, and we should still celebrate them. And, not that I had anything to do with the revival or anything like that, but I think I tried my best to keep it out there and keep people talking about it through my doc. And that eventually led to the movie Hitchcock, which was, with Anthony Hopkins. And, Stephen Rebello, I've since become very friendly with, and we sat down for lunch, and it was just so funny. I was like, I bet, I know how you feel because you're the psycho. No matter what you do in your life, you're the psycho guy. And now I feel like your younger brother who is forever the psycho guy. And he thanked me. He's like, you know what? I really do appreciate you keeping it out there. I think because of people like you, that's why Hitchcock happened, the movie. Because that movie was in development for many, many years. And again, through that, the Bates Motel TV series started. And now I have no doubt that there will be another Psycho or Norman Bates or another version of it at some point.
Well, that is actually what I was going to ask you. Do you know of anything bubbling up that is kind of in that universe?
No, not offhand. I mean, now I think it's about celebrating, the show ended on a really strong note. And it's its own interpretation. What's funny is I think the '98 remake cushioned the blow for remaking Psycho because everyone said you can't remake it, and they tried beat for beat, and it didn't work. And I think the show didn't have that kind of, the worry of like, are we going to do exactly what Hitchcock did or whatever, because it had already been attempted. And so they were able to kind of do their own version of it. And what's cool about that is, I always thought of Norman Bates as the Hamlet of horror. He is this Shakespearean character that is just destined for tragedy. And you can retell that story any way you want now. And I think it'll be a few years, but I have no doubt maybe the next time we see Norman Bates, it'll be another Psycho movie or a Bates Motel movie, whatever you want to, whatever interpretation it takes. But because of this, I think it proved the validity that you can retell his story and people will still be interested.
I hope in my own way that this podcast does some of that too. I mean, it was certainly it got a lot more attention than would have been predicted based on the subject matter.
Yeah.
For which I'm really grateful. So, so I hear you, and I hope you're right about that. So, you talked to a lot of people for your documentary. I'm curious, did you talk to Paul Jasmine?
No, I did not. And I know he was very good friends with Anthony Perkins and also was, I believe, one of the 4 voices in the original Psycho that made up Mother. But I did track down, and now I've completely lost track of Kurt Paul, who seemed like a pretty big get at the time because he was very, 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 very close to Anthony Perkins. He was his double. And I know he doubled him for Psycho 2 and 3 and several other movies. And also, he had a little bit part in Psycho 4 at the very beginning is kind of one of the first Psycho characters we meet, Raymond Lynette, who also was guilty of matricide and killed his mother. And he was an interesting character, a bit on the odd side, which
it's only appropriate.
Yeah, which was appropriate. And I don't know, a lot of people, I have to tread lightly because I don't want to say anything negative, but their relationship seemed, yeah, I'm not going to go there.
Whose relationship?
Well, Kurt Paul.
With Tony, you mean?
With Tony, yeah.
I see.
I mean, Kurt had nothing but extremely nice things to say about Anthony Perkins. A lot of people had very mixed reactions to Anthony Perkins, which I found very interesting in doing the documentary. At the end of the day, nothing matters other than what's on screen. And I mean, it is one of those performances that will forever go down in history that's why it's so impossible for anyone to step into Norman Bates' shoes because he's so indelible and identified with that character.
Yeah, it certainly is. The reason I ask you about Paul Jasmine, he was like the one figure from the original film that I was able to reach out to and interview as part of my research for this project.
Oh.
And he had a lot of interesting things to say to me about that time because, yes, he was one of the voices of Mother, and he told the story of how he would have the parties with Tony and they would crank call people and he would imitate this old crone, and that was so appealing and funny to Hitchcock that's how he became one of the voices of Mother. One of the other things that he and I talked about that I did not end up in the podcast was I asked him how he thought Tony would respond to Bates Motel. And I think you can predict that his reaction was that Tony probably wouldn't like it. And I think the reason isn't because of what Bates Motel is as much as it's just watching someone else play that character for someone who had made his career on that character would have been a real difficult thing for Tony Perkins.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously he knew him. I never met the man, unfortunately, and he knew him better, so he would know better. But I would like to think that he would have appreciated this version in comparison to what was done before, because he definitely did not like the Bates Motel TV pilot that starred Bud Cort as a Norman Bates-esque character from 87 or so. There's a bit in our deleted scenes on the documentary where he's saying how awful it is. And I know he wouldn't appreciate the Psycho remake from 98 because it's just, it doesn't really capture the nuances of what they were all doing. And if you listen to the commentary, I just feel like they're missing the point of what everybody did in that original movie. But at the same time, I think that, Freddie Highmore is an incredible actor, very respectful to what was done before, and definitely brought his own thing to it. So I don't know. I think because of the complexities of this and the way they changed the story for the show, it might have been something that Perkins appreciated. But, one of the things I learned while making the doc is, and I never really got a concrete answer on it, was that obviously this character was a blessing and a curse to him.
Sure.
And, a lot of people say he hated that he was associated with it. I like to think, based on the footage I saw and the people I talked to, that he came to terms with it by the end of his life. That, yes, he is Norman Bates and he will forever be known as that character. And, a perfect example is, towards the end of his life, he was, I don't know if it was him or his representation, were very much shying away from Psycho and Norman Bates, even though he had already done 3 sequels. And an example was Innovation Comics had done a straight adaptation of Psycho, a 3-issue comic book adaptation. And I remember I spoke to the artist, Philippe, and he, it's pretty much shot for shot the Hitchcock movie. That's what it's based on. And the only difference is the appearance of Norman Bates is not at all Anthony Perkins. Everybody looks like Janet Leigh. It looks like all the other characters. But Perkins he looks kind of like the book description, which is balding and a little overweight. And the artist told me that he drew it as Anthony Perkins and that his people or his estate or whoever objected and said he doesn't want to be associated with Psycho anymore. You have to change it. And so if you look at that comic book, it does not look like Anthony Perkins because apparently, and I say apparently, he didn't want he didn't want to be associated with it anymore. However, at the same time, I spoke to Tony Timpone, my mentor and the editor-in-chief of Fangoria magazine for many, many years. And he had hosted they set up a Fangoria show called the Horror Hall of Fame. This is around the exact same time. And it ran for 3 years. It was a really cool, horror awards ceremony show. And, Tony had told me a story that he had reached out to Perkins' people about getting him to present an award, and they declined. They're like, no, he doesn't want to do horror stuff anymore. He doesn't want to be associated with blah, blah, blah. And then Tony had bumped into Tony Timpone had bumped into Tony Perkins and asked him in person. It was just one of those rare coincidences. And he's like, no, I'd be more than happy to do that. And he ended up presenting an award at this show because he got to Tony Perkins directly. So again, so it's a weird thing where it's like, I don't know if he really wanted to shy away from it or if it was just his people and representation. I like to think that he totally embraced it by the end because it's like how many people in film history will be remembered forever for a character that they portrayed and created.
I think too, it's hard to for people to remember that at the time that he did Psycho, at the time that he worked with Hitchcock, he was one of the hottest young actors in Hollywood. He had an incredibly promising career. He had been in some big movies already. He had worked with just a load of big stars. And here was a chance to work with Alfred Hitchcock. In all of film history, how many careers has Alfred Hitchcock ruined? So I think it's natural to think that this was the best possible thing that could happen to him. And he ultimately, as you say, got celebrity out of it, fame as well as infamy. And yeah, it was pigeonholing to some degree, but not altogether. He had other projects in the pipeline, just nothing that had the glare of this. But again, how many actors, once they reach that certain age, are in the public eye for anything? Let alone a project that they did that was as famous as Psycho.
Well, it's interesting. It's the careful what you wish for syndrome because that period you were talking about, he was like the equivalent of like the teen bop sort of I mean, he has record. I have his records. He was, they were putting out records and really priming him as this, young teen idol.
That's true.
And he hated that apparently. So it's like, I'm going to work with Hitchcock, and little did he know that it completely obliterated that image of him, but then it also stuck with him. And the other thing I find fascinating is, does that even happen anymore? Because it's like Anthony Perkins got stuck, for better or worse, being pigeonholed as Norman Bates. George Reeves from The Adventures of Superman could never shake the Superman persona. And I don't think that's a thing anymore. It's like, people can play different superheroes, and there's no issue. They can play multiple characters and they don't get stuck with that image. I wonder if that was just a product of the times.
Well, wait a minute. Who was Anakin Skywalker in episodes 2 and 3?
Oh, Hayden Christensen. Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Unfortunately, I think there may be still a few people, but it tends to swirl around that Star Wars universe. But your point's well taken.
Right, right.
Who else did you talk to that was associated with the original that told you some anecdotes that I think people might, be surprised to hear? Did you connect with Janet at all?
No, she was gone by the time that I started my project, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. The one person that he's gone now, but he was so sweet, and I was so glad to get to interview him for the doc, was Hilton Green, who was the assistant director to Mr. Hitchcock on the original Psycho. And then, he was part of his TV crew, and then he ended up staying with him on the features for pretty much everything he did after that. And Hilton Green, to me, is the glue that holds the whole franchise together, because he's the one and only person that had something to do with every movie. He ended up producing Psycho 2, 3, and 4. He's technically a producer on the remake, although he confessed to me that he thought it was a mistake. And I mean, he was a sweet, sweet guy. I was super intimidated because to me, he's Hollywood royalty. I learned a lot about the original movie in retrospect through the people that worked on the sequels. And what I mean by that is, somebody like Richard Franklin, who directed Psycho 2, he was like a Hitchcock protege. And I believe he was on the set of, I want to say, Topaz. That was one of the main reasons that Perkins agreed to do the sequels, because here's a guy that very much understood Hitchcock and, got to know the man and worked with, not worked directly with Hitchcock, but basically shadowed him on some of his later films. So it was just kind of interesting to hear little anecdotes about how Perkins was on set with Hitchcock. People always said that Hitchcock was, treated actors like cattle and didn't really care. The movie was done by the time before they even shot. He'd already thought it out. And basically everyone I talked to, from Hilton Green to the people involved with Psycho 2, said that it wasn't true at all. And in fact, one of the greatest scenes in terms of acting in the original Psycho, in my opinion, is with Martin Balsam interrogating Anthony Perkins. That first confrontation in the office. And the interesting thing about that was, back in those days, 1960, they were rehearsing it, and I guess the way they were doing it, they were pretty much talking over each other. There was a level of nervousness in that interrogation that they had worked it out in a way where they started talking over each other. And that was kind of a no-no in those days, because you wanted to have clean sound bites and clean edits. And basically Perkins was nervous to say to Hitchcock, hey, we have this idea. But they pitched it to him and he's like, that's great, let's do it. And so that's a clear example of, here's an idea that these actors came up with on the fly. And it wasn't like Hitchcock was meticulously, no, we have to shoot it exactly as I storyboarded or pictured it. And to me, it's one of the greatest scenes in the whole movie. So despite his reputation, I've learned that he was very, very open to collaboration with a lot of people, including his lead actors. And I mean, Stuart Gordon had a lot of great stories. Stuart Gordon is the director of Reanimator and a lot of great films. He did a TV movie with Anthony Perkins, and they apparently got along really famously. And Gordon was a huge Hitchcock fan. So basically, in between takes, that's all he asked him about was Psycho and Hitchcock. And yeah, there were just so many fun stories he told him, including that Martin Balsam one. Perkins came up with the idea of the candy corn, because there's a huge bird motif in the entire movie that was completely intentional. And that was just one of the many things that Perkins came up with, thinking like, well, he's got a little bit of a childlike way about him, so he would eat candy. And what if he pecked at it like a bird? And Hitchcock loved that idea. It's like, sure, let's do it.
Did anybody tell you, any of your interviews tell you that Hitchcock would occasionally, I didn't have this in the podcast, would occasionally refer to Perkins as Master Bates?
Yeah, that was kind of his sense of humor, from what I gather. And so it's not, that's totally sounds exactly like something he would say. That was actually something Kurt Paul said a lot.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as a joke. So I have heard the Master Bates thing, which is hilarious.
Somehow that never made it into the podcast. I don't know why. Did you see, there was a video that Freddie Highmore did for one of the Comic-Cons, I guess, where he's taking a tour of the Bates Motel and the Psycho House? Yeah. That is, can you you remember it well enough to describe it? Because it's the funniest thing, and I don't think more people have seen that.
It's wonderful. It's on YouTube. It's pretty readily accessible, and it was in between seasons 1 and 2. Basically, they did this funny bit where, the writer's room for Bates Motel is set up at the Universal backlot in Hollywood, and Freddie Highmore shows up, and obviously people don't realize he's this very proper English kid who speaks like 10 languages or whatever. And he comes into the writer's room and he sees all these cards that are all for Vera, his co-star, and he's like, well, where's all my scenes?
All the plot points.
To distract him, they're like, hey, do you want to go see The Real House? So they bring him down to The Real House, and he kind of freaks out when he sees somebody else playing Norman. And takes his place. It's really, really funny. And
it is terrific. Everybody should see it.
Yeah.
It's really terrific. Well, Rob Galluzzo is senior editor at Blumhouse.com. Check out his stuff there at Blumhouse.com. Also, he is one of the hosts of the podcast Shockwaves. And more directly to our purposes here is the creator and director of an amazing documentary about the original Psycho and its various sequels called The Psycho Legacy. Check that out. And Rob, thank you so much for your time today.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
We'd like to learn more about you. Please complete a short survey at Wondery.com/survey and subscribe to this show on iTunes, Stitcher, the Wondery app on Android, or wherever you listen. It's free. For more information and to comment on this show, visit our website, Wondery.com/Inside Psycho. If you like the show, we'd love you to give us a 5-star rating and a review. It helps others go Inside Psycho too. Written and narrated by Mark Ramsey. Sound design and editing by Jeff Schmidt. Produced by Mark Ramsey Media. Executive producers Jeffrey Glazer and Hernan Lopez for Wondery. Please thank us by rewarding our sponsors with your support. Tell your friends about this show. And Mother thanks you. Hey, Inside Psycho fans, I want to recommend a show you may like called Crime Town. It's from our friends at Gimlet Media and the creators of HBO's The Jinx. Crime Town was named by the New York Times as one of the best new podcasts of 2016. They called it an engrossing and disturbing portrait of organized crime in Providence, Rhode Island. Once you hear episode 1, I think you'll be hooked. And the season finale airs on Sunday, May 7th, so you can finally binge listen to the full season. You can find season 1 of Crime Town in Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.